Hello, everyone. Can you hear okay? Folks online, let us know too if there's anything you're not hearing well. Welcome, everyone. My name is Emma Garrett. I am a registered nurse and co-director of the Addiction Nursing Fellowship. I also work with the First Nations Health Authority as a clinical nurse specialist focused on substance use and harm reduction. I want to thank everyone who's joined us today in person, as well as those joining online. It's a really exciting moment. This is our first What's New of this fellowship year, and so great to have the opportunity to be together in person. I haven't stood here since before the pandemic and have spent lots of time here. So for me, also a really nice moment. I am going to introduce Jaspreet Randhawa, who will be presenting today. And thanks for stepping up and doing this first presentation. So Jaspreet is a registered psychiatric nurse who's been working for 15 years in acute inpatient psychiatry. She also has a master's in public health from SFU and worked between night shifts to prepare this presentation to share with you all. So fellows work on a presentation of a topic of interest for them. And she is going to share with you what she found as she explored the topic of how are we talking to youth about harm reduction. And I'd like to acknowledge, as well as we begin, that here at St. Paul's, we're located on the unceded, ancestral, and occupied lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And thanks, other folks, for joining us online from where you are. If you'd like to pop a land acknowledgement in the chat, you can do that. However, for any questions, we're going to use the Q&A function. If you want to save those till the end, we'll have an opportunity to moderate those. And everyone online is muted for now as well. And I'll pass it over to Jaspreet. Join me in welcoming Jaspreet in the room.
Hello, everyone. Can you guys hear me? Please let me know if you can't. As I go, I tend to go slow. As Emma has introduced myself, my name is Jaspreet. I have been working in the field of inpatient psychiatry for the last 15 years. And today I will be presenting.
Code white for our level 5, center room 536 alpha. Code white for our level 5, center room 536 alpha.
How are we talking to youth about harm reduction? I'm very interested in this topic, not only because of my background in psych and addictions, but also being a mother of 2 young children. I always think about, how am I going to have these conversations with my kids? Drugs are out there. This is the reality of life. So, but we need to make our, youth informed give them accurate information so they can make good decisions. Okay. I cannot. Oh, I cannot see my notes. Sorry. Okay. I want to start this presentation by acknowledging that I'm a humble guest on the unceded traditional territories of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. So the objectives of this presentation, we are going to review the current state of harm reduction education for youth, identify some of the evidence-based and youth-driven interventions, and then looking at the gaps and the opportunities for improvement in delivery of harm reduction education among youth. What is harm reduction? I'm sure you guys have heard about this. You know what harm reduction is, but I'm just going to go briefly over the definition. It refers to the policies, programs, and practices that aim to reduce the adverse health, social, and economic consequence of the use of drugs without necessarily reducing the drug consumption. So harm reduction, it benefits not only individual, but families and communities. It does acknowledge that substance use, be it drugs, cigarettes, alcohol, it's part of life. And so our aim should be reducing the harmful effects of the substance use rather than simply ignoring or condoning this practice. So what are some of the approaches that has been that are out there to kind of dealing with substance use and other risky behaviors in youth? So what we tend to do, we tend to discourage the behavior. We tell them like, you shouldn't be doing this, or we encourage the teen to reduce the behavior. Or we provide the teen with the information aimed at reducing the harmful consequences of the behavior when it occurs, not before it, but when it occurs. So then we talk about those. As we know that education is one of the valuable strategies for primary prevention. It is not the foolproof method for solving all the potential health problems, but it is widely regarded as an efficient and cost-effective approach to reducing the mortality and morbidity. So I think it's important for us to start educating our youth about harm reduction so we can prevent those, we can reduce the harms that are related to the substance use. So what is, youth that I am talking about here? As we know that youth, the term youth is loosely defined across various literature and policymaking. Sometimes youth can be referred as, in BC I found this definition. Youth is referred to as a person who is 16 years of age or older and under the age of 19. But again, it is a broad category. It can range anywhere from 10 to 24 years. Like some services that you will see, like Foundry, it starts, the age limit is from 12 to 24. For EPI, it's from like 16 to 25. So it varies. Again, but if you look at overall, young people between the age of 10 to 24 represent at least a quarter of the world population. So, we need to, so the age that someone first uses drugs can have major impact on their drug use trajectories and harms. And also initiating drug use at a younger age is predictive of developing health and social issues. As we know that quarter of our population is youth. So I think it's important for us to focus on the health of our young people, so that because it's a predictor of future population health and social and economic development. So I think it's important for us to start focusing on youth, probably as early as age 10, and start educating them about harm reduction. So why young people use drug? We know that drugs are part of society, but why do young people use drugs? As in our personal life, at workplace, we have encountered young people, I think as young as 10 to 12, who have been involved in some kind of a substance use. So I think for some young people, drugs are part of socializing, pleasure, fun. Sometimes they use drugs to navigate boredom, sometimes to relieve the physical and the psychological pain, and sometimes to escape the trauma and forms of historical and structural oppression along the axis of race, gender, class, sexuality, and ability. And I think sometimes the youth don't get a chance to tell why they're using drugs. Sometimes the youth are using drugs to mediate their psychological pain, physical pain. There is much more there than individual choices. There are many layers to it, I think. So I think we need to focus on different layers. It's not always fun and pleasure that they are using drugs for. Sometimes kids with mental health issues, they use drugs to relieve their symptoms. Sometimes they, and especially the youth who are homeless or living on the streets, they sometimes use drugs to kind of protect themselves, to stay awake so that they can, be safe. And sometimes they start selling drugs to, that's kind of a form of harm reduction for them, right? They are meeting their own needs with any ways that they can find. This is the reality that our young people are dying from overdoses. Youth are more likely to use drugs more heavily and riskier way than adults. And because they probably don't have accurate information, because I think as a parents, we don't want to have those discussions with our kids because we might think, okay, giving them too much information, they might be intrigued, they might want to use the drugs. So I think that's why, they are in the category where they are putting themselves at the risk because they don't have information. Again, youth use drug for the reasons that are highly logical given their lived reality. So again, not only just looking at individual choices, there are many layers to why young people are using drugs. So I think we need to look at their lived realities too. So these are the stats, which is related to drug toxicity deaths related to opioids. But my presentation is not just limited to opioids. It's I am talking about alcohol, cannabis, and other drugs too. But right now, because we are in this pandemic of opioids, and I think I just wanted to bring these stats to see how the young people are also being affected by this pandemic. When you look at this slide, it doesn't seem like, oh, there is, it's not significant. There was 142 youth unregulated drug toxicity deaths in 2017 to 2022, which averages to about 24 deaths per year. So when you look at it, it doesn't seem like, oh, it's not that significant. But when you look at the average between the last 5 years and this from 2012 to 2016,
Code red, Providence 8 Alpha Bravo. Code red, Providence 8 Alpha Bravo. Code red, Providence 8 Alpha Bravo.
So the average has more than tripled from last 5 years to 2017 to 2024. So the average was 6.4 deaths per year, and now we are at 24 deaths per year. And just remember, if we continue to increase the way we are going to have more and more youth dying from opioids. This slide, it shows that unregulated drug toxicity was the leading cause of unnatural death among youth from 2017 to 2012, followed by suicide and motor vehicle accidents. And also, this is youth between 17 to 18 years of age accounted for 62% of the death, and males accounted for 54% of the death. But when you look at male and females between the age of 17 and 18, the divide was not that far. It was 76% and 66%, whereas in adults, males account for approximately 80% of unregulated drug toxicity deaths. Looking at the numbers, from the health authority point of view, Fraser Health was had the maximum number of deaths, which was 51, followed by Island Health and then Interior Health. Based on the townships experiencing the highest number of unregulated toxicity death among youth, it included Greater Victoria, Vancouver, and Surrey were the 3 highest townships. And then the location of the injury, out of all these deaths, 105, which is like 74% of the deaths, injury location was at a private residence. And then the rest 11% were in kind of recovery houses, shelters, hotels, outdoor spaces. So what are the common approaches to drug use that you guys that we have heard of? I remember growing up, I remember my parents telling me, oh, you shouldn't be using drugs. There was no discussion about it, no talks about drugs at home. All I was told was not to use drugs, right? Which is typically abstinence-based approach, zero tolerance, and harm reduction was not kind of part of that approach. People think that harm reduction encouraged the drug use, there is a there is a goal towards eradication of the drug use. We have the goal to save our youth by encouraging them towards complete abstinence. But we think that when we deny our youth the harm reduction services and education, we think by not providing them with the supplies, they won't use it, or by not providing them with the education, or by providing them with the education, they'll be more curious and more tempted to use the drugs. But so that's why I think the parents use this approach of like, I know what's best for you, I need to save you, so you need to listen to me, and my approach is like, you shouldn't be using drugs, rather than taking a stance of like, I should be informing my kids about everything, and then making sure that they are taking the calculated risk, right? So some of the zero tolerance approaches that are out there that has been implemented, DARE is one of the programs. So it's a drug abuse and resistance education programs. It's based on Just Say No concept. It was founded in 1983, and it has been implemented widely in North America, schools in North America. So it focuses on zero tolerance, right? But the intentions behind these programs are really good, right? Like, people want to protect their children and the communities from the dangers of substance use. But the problem is that they are often ill-informed and they are biased. These programs utilize various strategies to persuade adolescents not to use the drugs, but without providing them with the tools to make those informed decisions. So even though these programs assert that they are science-based and evidence-based, but many independent studies have shown that these programs are not effective in reducing the substance use. So the next program is called Project Alert. It's a project adolescent learning experience resistant training alert. It was developed in 1980 by Rand Corporation. And the goal of this program was to motivate students against drug use, to cultivate new and non-use attitudes and beliefs, and equip teens with skills and strategies that they'll use to resist drugs. Again, this program asserts that they are evidence-based and it can be a universally applicable substance abuse prevention program. But again, many studies have shown that this program is not effective. There has been 3 main studies that has been done to evaluate this program. The first study indicated that the program only had short-term benefits, and it was ineffective for the adolescents who were already using the drugs. And then 2 follow-up studies concluded that the effectiveness of the program was very short-lived. So what does youth want, right? So how we know that these approaches that has been implemented are not very effective? So I think, who are we gonna know what's gonna work from? What's gonna work for them is youth, right? This is a really good study that has been done by researchers from University of British Columbia and University of Calgary. And it's showing us a way forward. So Emily Jenkins, a UBC professor of nursing, what they did was she and her colleagues interviewed 83 teenagers across BC. And interestingly, what they found was that harm reduction message resonated the most with teens instead of typical do not do drugs approach. So what teens told them was that they generally tune out when the parents are talking about zero tolerance because it did not reflect the realities of their life, because either their peers, they themselves, or somebody in their family members were already using the substance. So, so some of the key findings of the study was that zero tolerance continues to be an acceptable strategy among parents in talking to children about substance use. Many teens told that zero tolerance was assumed without any discussions. Kids just knew that it wasn't accepted, and end of story. The parents didn't engage in a discussion about this, and it was a missed opportunity, leading to family fragmentations and kids feeling that they didn't have somebody to go to talk to. The second was that the government messaging campaign and the policy approaches to youth substance use frequently seek non-controversial approaches. Harm reduction is a controversial approach when it comes to youth, right? It's more accepted when we talk about adults, but again, when it comes to youth, it is still a strategy that is controversial, right? Again, harm reduction approaches are more responsive to youth's perspective and needs. Harm reduction was the approach that resonated with the youth because when parents are talking to their children about alcohol, it's more socially acceptable. So I think parents are more open to talking about you shouldn't be drinking too much, you should be starting slow, or don't drive. They're already doing the harm reduction in terms of alcohol, but I think it's hard for our parents to do the same thing with other drugs. I think because it's not socially acceptable to do that. So I think there's still a lots of stigma that's attached to it. So I think, again, the harm reduction was the approach that, kids thought was the good approach because it was giving right tools to the people so that they can make those informed decisions. Again, lived experience is foundational to understanding what works. So most of the programs and the policies that were made excluded youth. They did not include youth voices. They did not know, they were made by adults who did not know what youth was going through, I think. So I think it was important to include young people in that perspective. And again, the risk environment lens that supports an understanding of youth substance use, I think we need to look at that too, not just like this is their individual choice, but why, what is the other factors that contribute to this. So this study really goes beyond your typical approach, which features the adult perspectives. It brought the youth out there, their voices, their knowledge, their expertise, which was the critical element that was missing. So then the key message was that harm reduction emerged as a predominant approach for addressing substance use in adult population, and it is beginning to use as a guiding philosophy for school-based education.
Code red, all clear. Code red, all clear. Code red, all clear.
So why are we so afraid of keeping our youth safe when it comes to youth who use drugs? Why are we spreading this fear-based messaging that drugs are harmful and unsafe? We know that our youth are complex, unique, and resilient. We need to allow our youth to make
Code white for our level 1 ABDU. Code white for our level 1 ABDU. Code white for our level 1 ABDU.
So we need to allow our youth to make their own choices when it comes to services or resources to truly meet where they are. So why is harm reduction? Why harm reduction? Harm reduction and prevention are both important ingredients to any kind of a comprehensive approach to preventing substance-related harm. Harm reduction is evidence-based, and it addresses drug use from micro level, which is individual families, communities, to macro level, which is like local, state, federal policies. And it also promotes social justice, human rights, users' rights, health, and social and economic development, as opposed to demonization of drug consumption. Harm reduction creates the safety and freedom to ask questions about substances and get accurate information. So this is, with this approach, there is an honest and open conversation about drugs. We are providing them with accurate information, not maximizing, exaggerating the harms, but actually giving them the right information. It also meets youth where they are at rather than where we want them to be, right? And we know substance use harm is complicated. It's much more than individual choices. There are other realities of poverty, class, racism, trauma, sex, and gender-based discrimination, and other social inequalities that contribute to the drug use. So harm reduction approach is congruent with what's known about adolescent development and decision making. You know, we know people are still gonna use drug despite any attempts to convince them not to, right? You know, with this approach, what we are trying to do is we are accepting the person and we are welcoming them no matter what. You know, if they're ready for change, we accept them. If they are not, what we tend to do is reduce the harms with this approach. And then also we are recognizing that adolescents are, you know, people who can make responsible decisions without, you know, need from, you know, a parental supervision or, you know, but the abstinence-based approach in teens has prevailed, attaching stigma, moral judgment to substance users and substance use and users. So instead of learning the facts and how to make informed, healthy decision about use. So, you know, with this harm reduction, what we are trying to do is our main objective is to reduce the harm. We are not, you know, recommending abstinence, but what we are trying to do is just educating our youth so that they can make those informed decisions. And if they are willing to take the risk, they are taking a calculated risk. I'm sure you guys have heard about principles of harm reduction. I'm not going to go over all of this, but just a few of them. It's a practical approach. What does person want and what they are able to do in this moment. So it's basically about the person, not about what we want from them. It focuses on harms rather than on the substance use. So what we are going to do is we are going to address the harms by providing the strategies to reduce the person's risk. For example, by telling them not to use alone, by you know, going slow, carrying an naloxone kit. These are the signs of overdose. Just, you know, teaching them. And also it recognizes human rights, that everyone has right to choose to be safe and to be treated with respect and dignity. So why harm reduction approach is necessary? We know that initiation of alcohol, tobacco, and cannabis occur mostly when people are in secondary education. It can occur before that too, but mostly the older the teenagers get, the higher percentage who start or will continue to use. So what harm reduction does is it can offer alternative consumption models with lower risk. You know, as we know that harm reduction, it's a method. It uses a variety of interventions, and education is one of those interventions. So it focuses on the fact that substance use exists on a spectrum ranging from beneficial to problematic use. And then it focuses on the fact that preventing substance use is unrealistic. And we have already seen there have been policies and programs that are centered around zero tolerance, abstinence-based approaches, which has not worked so far. So I think we need to look beyond you know, our current policies and see what's going to work. So harm reduction is one of the way forward, because it is more sensitive to the causes that led adolescent and young people to consume substance, giving them greater credibility to prevention efforts. It not only just looks at you're using drugs, but why? What are the reasons? We look beyond, you know, just the use. It is also beneficial to non-users because it teaches them how to identify the risky situation and keep their friends safe. I was just talking to my colleague last week, and she was telling me she was working in a merge. There was an 18-year-old that was brought in, was unconscious. They had no ID on her, and she did not make it. But when they looked into it, so she went to a party and had consumed a drug, probably overdosed on it, but nobody called 911. So, you know, I think it's educating our youth that, you know, maybe if somebody had called 911 on time, got some help on time, that person's life could have been saved, right? So I think not only harm reduction is, you know, good for people who are already using, but it's also good for non-users too, so they can identify the risk and also keeping their friends safe. So the, you know, people know when to call for help. There are some educational approaches that are based on harm reduction.
Code white for res level 1, the emerging public waiting area. Code white for res level 1, the emerging public waiting area. Code white for our level 1, the emerging public waiting area and triage area.
So these are educational approaches based on harm reduction out there. So in USA, it's a safety first, UK SHARP program, Australia, we have Dave's, and Canada, we have Posse Project and Cannabis Toolkit. So I'm just gonna go over them briefly. So Safety First, it's a program that has been developed by Drug Policy Alliance, and it's the first program that is based on real drug education for teens. It is based on the principle that safest path for teen is to avoid drugs, including alcohol, cigarettes, prescription drug. But we know that some youth will choose to try drugs regardless of the risk. So the drug education should be scientifically accurate, honest, not seeking to minimize or exaggerate the risk of drugs, acknowledging the fact that not all the drugs carry the same risk, and also it's interactive and compassionate. So programs like DARE don't give the students tools that they need to make safe decisions or to get help if they have problems with substance use. So these are the strategies that kind of like teaches young kids to use their critical thinking to assess and evaluate this information about drugs and alcohol, learn how to learn decision-making and goal setting, develop personal and social strategies to manage the risk. So this program was evaluated by Dr. Nina Fisher. She's an associate professor at City University of New York. And these are some of the highlights of the evaluation of Safety First program. So what it did was it increased the students' knowledge of harm reduction, increased students' knowledge of drugs and regarding alcohol, cannabis, and opioids, increased students' knowledge of how to detect and respond to drug-related overdose. The second program is SHARP. It's a school health and alcohol harm reduction project. It teaches life skills training to reduce alcohol use and harms. This program, again, aims to decrease the harmful consequences of drinking rather than advocating abstinence. It includes education, skills training, small group discussion, decision-making discussion, activities to encourage positive behavioral change. As a result of better understanding, and also it's delivered in 2 phases over 2 academic years in a classroom setting. Again, evaluation of the SHARP program showed that there were statistically significant effects favoring the intervention on alcohol consumption and self-reported alcohol-related knowledge, attitude, and harms. The next program is drug education in Victoria schools. This education program that addresses issues around use of alcohol, tobacco, cannabis, and other drugs. Again, the evaluation of this program showed that there was a significantly greater increase in knowledge and knowledge about drugs, including alcohol. Again, there was alcohol consumption increased significantly less, and they experienced lesser increase in harms. And also there was a trend of less consumption by risky drinkers in the intervention group. So this project, a Posse project, it's not a school-based project. So just it's a project that's out there that's for youth, but it is not based out of school. It's a peer outreach support service and education. It's a youth-driven harm reduction and human rights training and peer outreach for youth between ages of 15 to 35. What it does, it educates youth to become a peer outreach within their community. And then what they do is they train the other youth and assist and educate their peers about, violence, homelessness, harm reduction, substance use, human rights. This is operating in communities of First Nation area in Sackville and Windsor. So the next is the Sensible Cannabis Toolkit. This toolkit was published by Canadian Students for Sensible Drug Policy. CSSDP is a grassroots network of youth and students who are concerned about negative impact of drug policies on individual and communities. The purpose of this toolkit was to provide the drug education with accurate information and awareness of resources and develop decision-making skills, health literacy, reduce the risk of consumption, and support increasing an individual's risk competency. So this kit has two parts. The first part highlights 10 guiding principles for conducting cannabis education with youth. And the second part focuses on the content that merits inclusion in comprehensive cannabis education curriculum for young people. So after the legalization of cannabis, it was an opportunity for school. This resource was made as a resource for educators and parents to have an informed and non-judgmental conversation with youth about cannabis. We talk about there is enough evidence in literature that harm reduction education works, but then we still face some, barriers and boundaries when it comes to school-based education. Why? Because there is a widespread misconception that harm reduction promotes or facilitates drug use. There is a reluctance among parents and teens. But when you explain to parents, they might be more open to harm reduction because harm reduction already works, right? Like we have a great example of comprehensive sex education. When initially the goal of the education was abstinence-based approach, you had this fear and shame a message attached to the teen that, oh, you shouldn't be having sex, you shouldn't be doing this, but we know that young people are going to have engaged in those sexual behaviors. So this comprehensive approach, what they did was they prioritized the safety. And then again, when we compared these two models, the abstinence-based education experienced higher rate of teen pregnancies and STIs, whereas comprehensive sex education, which prioritized the safety, had reduced risk associated with sex. So that's why I think there are programs that are based on harm reduction that's already working. So I think if we put it that way, parents might be more receptive to it. I think we just need to make parents and people out there educate them and make them more aware about what harm reduction is. Again, there's a belief that it's not morally acceptable to teach this content to minors. And also there is a reluctance from our government to promote the harm reduction education in school curriculum because it's still a controversial approach when it comes to youth. Then there is youth exclusion from harm reduction program. All the school-based drug education programs are made without any inputs from youth. So I think it's important to start engaging youth, involving youth, and again, youth inclusion from drug policy reform. There are programs out there which are youth-led harm reduction education programs. So this is one of the program, Naloxone Home. Naloxone Home, it was started by, in 2021 by first-year SFU student, Chloe Goddison. What she found was once she graduated from school, in university, there was a pandemic that was going on, but people didn't have any information about what are the signs of overdose, like what are naloxone kit. And so what she did was she started this program to provide students and communities with destigmatizing education and how the signs of overdose, stigma, naloxone, and how to keep each other safe. So it's a youth-led initiative, and it's made up of young adults who are eager to make change and end the stigma around harm reduction. So they do presentations in schools, like if you can go to their website and they have all these resources, and you can also request a presentation if you have a group that wanted to have a naloxone training. The second project is TRIP project. This is not a new project. It's been in since 1995, and it was created in Toronto due to the rave parties and stuff. So what it did was that the harm reduction concept was new, and the ravers were they really liked this concept because it was new and different. It challenged the social construct, and it empowered the individuals to make their own decisions around their lives and how to live them with awareness. So what they do is they have these outreach booths, and then it's staffed by youth workers and volunteers, and they offer a display of safer drug use, safe sex information, and supplies. So these are some of the voices from the community that are saying that we need to start educating our youth about harm reduction. So Jennifer Charlesworth, she is the province's independent representative for child and youth. And she said young people are hungry to learn about issues related to drug use, and education and early intervention is very important. Again, BC Coroner Services did say that they are supportive of any initiative that increases knowledge about life-threatening risk posed by toxic drug supply. And Leslie McBain from Mom Stop the Harm said it is critical for us, parents, educator, role models, peers, to create a safe, inclusive, non-judgmental spaces to speak honestly with our young people about substance use, the risk involved, and the support and the resources that are available to them. So I think people in the communities are also saying that, we need to have the honest education, drug education about for our kids. So what are some of the recommendations? This is a policy paper. This is a resource that was designed to inform a comprehensive and concrete action plans and strategies at various levels of Canadian education system to prevent substance-related harm. So this policy paper describes the issues related to youth substance use from public health perspective and aims to inform action to prevent substance use related harms through school communities. So what are some of the recommendations? So again, the objectives are to prevent the harms, to promote health and well-being. The key principle for action that came out of this policy paper was health equity, compassionate, non-judgmental, strength-based approach, harm reduction, multi-sectoral partnership, and evidence-based and show promise of working. So I think harm reduction was recognized as a practical, effective approach to substance use. Examples of youth-focused harm reduction initiatives included the health messages around the benefits of delaying or reducing substance use. For example, the recommendation for youth within Canadian low-risk alcohol drinking guideline, and again, low-risk cannabis use guidelines. Programs that provide access to nicotine replacement therapy for youth who want to reduce their tobacco smoking. Again, creation of safe spaces and support for honest and open discussion about drug use. The next is another paper that is, it was developed through engagement with Canadian school stakeholders, and it was designed to, again, inform a comprehensive, concrete action plan and strategies at various Canadian education system. So this was a joint forum created by Public Health Agency, co-hosted with 3 other organizations. And what they said was that, again, they focused on 4 evidence-based approaches in preventing the substance-related harms. The first one was upstream prevention, harm reduction, stigma reduction, and equity-oriented approaches. So again, harm reduction was the one of the recommendation that came out of this, this paper. So, we have been talking about harm reduction education. We want our youth to be educated about harm reduction in schools. But then again, do we have harm reduction services that are youth friendly? So I think at this point, that's why we have the health authorities and schools that need to come together to educate our youth about harm reduction education, but also making sure that there are enough harm reduction services that are available for youth and that are youth-friendly services, right? So there needs to be a partnership between health authorities and school in providing this education. One of the example could be having a public health nurse come to a school and give a presentation about, youth-friendly services and creating awareness about, naloxone, signs of overdose, what one person can do when they see these signs. So I think it's important for health authorities in school to come together. I have talked about the education part, harm reduction education part, but I do want to focus on harm reduction services that are available for youth because there are still gaps in youth-friendly harm reduction services. So these are the 2 studies that were done locally in Vancouver and The first one is harm reduction calls to action from young people who use drugs on the streets of Vancouver and Lisbon. And the second is a qualitative study exploring how young people perceive and experience substance use services in British Columbia. So these were some of the calls to action from Vancouver study. So what youth wanted was that there should be accurate information about the risk and benefits of drug use. Investment in youth, dedicated youth-led and youth-oriented harm reduction programs and spaces, including safe consumption, drug checking, shelter and housing sites, and to compulsory or involuntary abstinence-based treatment programs. So I think one of the things that came out of this study was that young people were scared to call 911 because they didn't want to go to hospital and get forced to have a treatment or other repercussions because of that. Youth voices should be better integrated into bottom-up and grassroots and top-down state-sponsored harm reduction movements and initiatives. Some of the themes that came out of the British Columbia study was these were the main three areas. The first is prevention and early interventions. Youth described feeling unworthy of health and social services. They said most of the services were geared towards the people who use harder substances. And also, the advertisement, the public health messaging that are out there are more polarizing and they are unconvincing. And also youth express that they want more information about neuroscience of addictions. In terms of service accessibility, youth expressed that they did not know what kind of services and supports were available. They wanted more information to be provided in schools about the long-term effects of different substance and harm reduction and how life choices and emotional regulation can play a role in substance use behavior. And also having this information widely available to help break the stigma so that people are more aware about what's out there. And then the third was service delivery. Youth wanted to be treated like, with the same respect and dignity like anyone else. They described that their youth are not being taken seriously when it comes to their issues. And also the youth, what they said was they desired a holistic approach, not only just, where all of the aspects of their life were considered, rather than solely focusing on the substance use. The other factors youth wanted service provided to consider included traumatic experiences, parental substance use, school and work stress, and social pressures, relationship issues. Okay, so these were some of the main highlights that came out of the study. So what are the next steps? So, as literature has shown that harm reduction education is important. So I think harm reduction education should be provided in schools across BC. Harm reduction should be part of school curriculum rather than abstinence-based approach. We know there has been enough evidence in literature showing that abstinence-based approaches do not work. So I think we need to focus on safety-based education and we need to engage our youth into harm reduction strategies. And we need to have an open and honest conversation with youth about drugs and harm reduction, and then also making sure that youth are involved in creating harm reduction programs, the policies. All right, and this is an additional resource. It's from Interior Health Harm Reduction Toolkit. It has a really great information about the programs that are out there for youth. So I think if you guys want to have a look at it, there is a link to it. And that's about it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jaspreet, for pulling together so much interesting information. I certainly learned a lot through this presentation. I think, a lot of us are aware of barriers that exist in the clinical realms, but it's really important to think about, what is going on for youth and young people in the rest of their lives. So we do have some time for Q&A if folks want to pop any questions in there. I'm just going to open up the chat as well. So there was a little bit of chat around that folks can see, but that there's a BC version of Safety First through Interior Health. So if folks in the room who aren't seeing that, That was a link that was shared, and we can share that out as well. Yeah, and just generally kudos for the presentation here. And also another comment about naloxone being a great program too. Just gonna see, I'm gonna maybe end the slideshow and then just click on the Q&A. Not seeing any Q&A right now. I think I would have a question. I have a question, and folks, again, feel free to type into the Q&A or into the chat because we're able to look at that as well. So it sounds like there's politically, a lot of reluctance to incorporate harm reduction in a widespread way into education programs for young people. So what freedom do schools or organizations have to provide that education? I have an experience where I was invited to do a presentation in a high school. It was a private high school, but I wasn't actually allowed to do the full naloxone training. They were talking about needing to get consent from all the parents. So yeah, just curious if you came across anything there in terms of if it's not yet at a place where it's being implemented in a widespread way, what freedom do individual schools or organizations have to provide education?
Again, I had a similar experience. I have been requested by a public health nurse to do a presentation in school because they have many youth with substance use issues, and the teachers and the other people in the school are not very aware of what are the signs and symptoms, what are the medication that kids are on, and knowledge about medication. So I think if it is coming from the government, then because it'll be discussed with the stakeholders and everybody before. So I think then we have to skip the parental approval rather than the schools taking their own, initiative in providing that education. Yeah, so I think it's important that it's coming from the government and implemented in all schools rather than just on some schools who are taking those initiatives themselves. Thanks.
There's another comment that they from Heather Lee. They've been focusing on school administration and teachers to do the naloxone training, but it's been a great chance for an introduction to the philosophy. Do any folks in the room have a question or a comment? And again, thanks for everyone's patience with the announcements in our
Code White, Providence 7 Charlie. Code White, Providence 7 Charlie. Code White, Providence 7 Charlie.
This is a question from Heather. Anyone have any experience with education sessions for parents? That was something I was curious about too. So parental inclusion.
Yeah, I think it's very important, right? Like I think, when I think with my background, I have enough, education in addictions and mental health, and I am finding it hard to have these conversations with my kids. And just imagine parents who have no knowledge about addictions and drug use. How are they going to have these, discussions with their teenagers? So I think that's why the health authorities need to jump in and kind of do their part of educating youth from and also maybe sessions for parents too, right? Educating parents to making them more aware about drugs and harm reduction.
I think a question here in the Q&A, have you come across the best platform for education opportunities for caregivers that discussed harm reduction, such as in group settings or individual? I'm wondering, that was sort of a similar question, support caregiver education.
The toolkit, the interior health toolkit, it's a really good resource even for parents. So it has a link to various different programs that are out there that parents can kind of educate themselves, right? They can go onto those places and just kind of get information. But again, not every parent has time to do that. So I think, everybody has to do their share, schools, health authorities, and, I always have a conversation with other parents who don't have the information. So I think everybody is doing their part in creating more awareness.
Infrared, all clear. Fire alarm is maintenance. Infrared, all clear. Fire alarm is maintenance. Infrared, all clear.
The cannabis toolkit also has some really great resources to guide parents. So it's focused on cannabis, but certainly some of those principles could be applied to conversations around other substances as well.
Due to fire alarm maintenance, fire bells will be ringing intermittently in the Comac building. Due to fire alarm maintenance, fire bells will be ringing intermittently in the Comac building. Due to fire alarm maintenance.
Well, we're almost done here, so we won't have to hear those fire bells. Farina has just shared, thank you for Coastal Health, used to have an education series that was available for family members. I remember that one as well. I don't think it's running anymore. And there are nonprofit organizations that provide some of these services for neighborhood houses, but agree that then it becomes the onus on the individual, parent, family to be able to provide that. And we're probably missing a lot of pieces there. Just wanted to see if anyone in the room had any responses or comments before we wrap up. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, just really quickly, my partner works in education and so is kind of coming up against a lot of this kind of pushback from parents and stuff not wanting to talk about things. It's just hard. And I'd be really curious, I'm not looking to you for the answer, but just how the partnership would happen with health authorities. And I just know, like with my own kids with sex education, it's presumed consent unless parents revoke. So rather than needing consent from every parent or caregiver, guardian, it's just, you have to actually be actionable and proactive about revoking your consent if you don't want your child to be a part of that. I feel like that might have more success. But yeah, it's really important. I know my partner asked me to get him naloxone kits for his high school because they're not provided. And so I snagged a few and gave them to him because I think it's very, very important. And then also just the vaping, like the vaping is just such, that needs to be talked about, I think, a lot more in a harm reduction way, because I don't think it's being addressed quite effectively. It's rampant throughout schools, and I think we're fighting a losing battle with that one in terms of just telling people can't do that. But it's having quite an effect on the school culture. So yeah, presumed consent unless revoked.
It was interesting. I was listening to this East Indian radio station one day, and they were talking about harm reduction, but then the message that they were conveying was that, we are encouraging students to use drugs by giving them all the supplies and the education. And I think there is so much misinformation out there in general public too about harm reduction. So I think, we need to educate, I think, everyone about harm reduction, the intention, the effectiveness of these programs, I think. So I was actually appalled to see that whole series on that harm reduction, that in Canada people, this is what the schools are doing, this is what people are encouraging, giving them supplies, so encouraging youth to use drugs. And it's like, no, you have tried your zero tolerance approaches. Did they work? No. Why are we having so many deaths? Right? Why are we having, I didn't mention it in the presentation, but there is 68,000 youth in BC that meets the criteria for substance use disorder. So if that approach had worked, we wouldn't have that much, a youth suffering from substance use disorder. So I think, again, awareness, reducing that stigma is a key to this.
Thanks so much, Jaspreet. I think that's a great note to wrap up on, a good call to action. Thanks for everyone who joined us today, and see you next time.
Thank you.